Hey guys, it's Sam. Thought I would do another kind of morning video here, just talking about, in this case, I want to talk about skill systems, particularly in Dungeons and Dragons, but really kind of it could apply to any role-playing game, and whether or not having a skill system is a mechanical way of basically skipping over role-play. Now, I want to, excuse me, make it clear that this is not, I'm not stating this as fact. I'm not stating that this is the case. I'm simply posing a question. And I would love to have your feedback on this and what you guys think. So, to play devil's advocate here, I'm going to say that perhaps skill systems in games like Dungeons and Dragons might be a detriment, or could be a detriment, to role-playing. Not stating that as 100% fact, like I said, but just that it could be. And here's why. How many times have you been at the table and you're in a situation, you're delving into a dungeon, and the person says, okay, I want to, the GM describes the table, the room, everything that's in it, whatever. And then maybe it's the rogue player says, I want to search for traps. And the GM says, okay, great, go ahead and roll whatever, whether it's perception or in 5e, I think you just make a dexterity test, and you add your proficiency, and then you have trap finding, you have thieves tools, I think, which you can use to add double proficiency or whatever. So you're basically making a roll, right? And then you make your roll, and if you find it, the DM says, okay, great, yep, you find a trap, or no, there's no traps in here, okay? Well, and then you kind of just move on. And let's say you find one, and it's like, okay, I want to disarm it. Okay, great, roll, right? So you're playing the mechanics, right? You're playing the game part of the role-playing game, but you're doing that because you have a skill, right? Now, even in the oldest iterations of D&D, they had that. I mean, when the thief class was actually introduced, they had, I believe, percentile rolls, right? But what I wonder is, prior to that, or let's say you don't have a thief in your party, and you say, okay, well, we're in the dungeon, I want to search for traps. If you don't have a skill to do that, you kind of have to have role-playing, right? And so what I would say in that case is, well, okay, what are you doing? Like, describe to me what you're looking for. What's the process? Now, good dungeon masters are probably going to do this anyway, regardless of whether you have a trap-finding skill or you have a proficiency or whatever, right? I mean, I think a lot of it depends on their preference for narration, as well as what they consider to be a valuable use of game time, right? Because some GMs don't. Some groups and some GMs, they really like the combat aspect of D&D. That's what they want to focus on. And maybe they do get very descriptive with that, but the other stuff, they just kind of want to skip over it because what they enjoy is combat, right? Others, it is that sort of dungeon survival, right, or wilderness survival, and so they will add more description and role play to those elements of the game, right? But let's suppose you don't have a character with a skill that makes them better at finding or disarming traps. Well, but you still want to search for them, right? Well, what do you do? Well, again, as the GM, I might ask, well, all right, how do you want to search for traps? And maybe you say, well, I'm going to tap along the floor with a 10-foot pole, or I'm going to, tap the walls and see if if anything springs, if there's any pressure plates or anything like that. Okay, great. No, you don't find anything there. No pressure plates, no tripwires, nothing like that. And then let's say the player is still suspicious, and they're like, okay, but, this corridor, I don't know, it's making me nervous. I want to go along the corridor and see if perhaps there's any holes on the wall, or there are any indications of, magical traps. And it's like, well, all right, you can search for the holes on the wall, but do you have any way of knowing whether there's magic or not? And they're like, oh, no, good point, but maybe the mage does, right? Okay, great. And then the mage says, oh yeah, sure, I'll go ahead and see if I can do anything. Perhaps I can cast Detect Magic. Sure, absolutely, right? Like you describe it. And then what you would do is if their description, let's say there was a pit trap and let's say they don't have a 10-foot pole, but they're like, hey, I think what I want to do is I want to take this, my water skin, and I want to pour water on the floor and see if any of the water disappears down into a crack or something like that, right? That's a clever use of player ingenuity to find a trap, right? So in that case, you don't need to have a skill, right? You don't need to say, well, all right, roll me the dice and see if you find it, right? Because really, they've described a very reasonable way of finding that pit trap, okay? And then if they want to disarm it, it's like, well, how do you disarm a pit trap, right? Like there's nothing to disarm. And if there is, maybe there's a lever or whatever, but maybe you just say, no, there's not really a way to disarm it, but there's a 1 or 2 foot gap on either side of it. You can just walk around it. Perfect. So, Dark Age of Roleplay says, not a detriment, but unnecessary. Yeah, well, and that's, that's my big thing, because, and I'm sure you've seen, if you've seen any of my videos, I'm really digging into the OSR games now, and based on what I've seen, and granted, I've never played them, I haven't had the chance to run them yet, but based on what I've seen, really it's that description and that player ingenuity that drives the game, along with the GM or the DM really driving that narration as well. So to me, that's very, very appealing. But I've also seen this happen with social skills, right? Or with investigation, right? Okay, well, I want to see if there's any, magic items in this room. I want to see if there's any, any particular documents in this room. Okay, roll your search skill. All right, great. But essentially, to me, what that makes me think is that that's ultimately a skip button, right? It is a way of kind of jumping over the talky bits to get back to the action bits. So I don't know. I'm curious about that. All skills fall under attributes in, say, 5e. So it's just use attributes. That's OSR gaming in a nutshell. Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, well, and that's the thing, right? That's one of the things I like about 5e is that they basically are just additions to an attribute test, right? Except that on the 5e sheet, they do have skills. Now, it's not like 3.5 or Pathfinder where you actually had skill points and you had to decide if you were going to put skill points into this skill, and they had stupid things like, what was it? I think it was like move silently and hide were separate skills. Now, I get that because those are different things, but let's be honest, nobody wanted to do that. A stealth skill makes more sense, right? In terms of speed of play and all that. So, I don't know. That's something that's interesting to me. And then I'm going to talk quickly about the social skills as well, because I've mentioned this in other videos, and it's one thing that I have had a big issue with since I started gaming, was the fact that you had social skills, right? That you could essentially sort of let the dice determine the outcome when it came to social stuff, right? Now, one of the big things that I've seen to kind of counter this argument is, well, you as the GM don't make me the player actually, simulate combat physically at the table. So, I get to roll for those, for strength and dexterity tests. So why am I expected to not roll for the social tests, right? So I'm sure some people have heard that argument before. And to a point, that's valid, right? I mean, if we have a game and why would the rules not apply in one situation but in another? But to me, this is a game about role-playing, and role-playing is inherently a social thing, right? You're using your words and your description. And so, to me, it doesn't make sense when, I say, okay, well, I want to know if the guard is lying to me. Okay, we'll make a perception check or a sense motive check or whatever it happens to be, right? Whatever the skill is. You know, I get that in real life there are situations in which there are people that are better trained to spot deception, and that, you know, there are people out there that are better able to lie with a straight face, you know. So I think that that's what those skills are trying to take into account. But to me, that always felt artificial. That always felt fake to me, right? That always was like, well, you tell me. I mean, what do you think? You know, and as a game master, if a player says, I am looking to see if there are any tics, any facial cues, is he looking off to the side? Is he, is he giving any obvious signs of deception? I'm going to take that into account. And if the player is really actively looking for those things, and I, as the game master, know, yes, indeed, this person is trying to lie to you, most likely I'm going to give that to the player. I'm going to be like, look, you see these signs. You know, there is maybe a very sort of verbal tic that he has, or there is a certain, you know, squinting of his eyes or looking down to the left or whatever. You notice these things. There's no need for a skill roll there, right? Or you could just say, or if the player doesn't describe anything, they don't tell you what they're looking for or why they would believe that this person might be lying, you say, you don't know, right? And then you find out later. And that's the other thing I hated about those skills, was that they sort of dictated an immediate resolution. Is the guard lying to me? You roll the dice. Well, what if you roll a natural 20? In that case, and not that natural 20 it has to be a success, because by the rules it doesn't say that, at least in modern D&D, but that's the expectation, right? You rolled really well. You have a really good sense motive skill or whatever, and you expect that the GM is going to say the correct thing, the accurate thing, right? So what if that guard was lying? But I don't want you to know that right now. If you have a skill and you roll it and you roll really well, I'm supposed to say, yeah, he's lying to you. And if I'm a good GM, then I will kind of describe how you might know that, right? Or I might ask you as the player, well, how do you know this? But to me, that doesn't always serve the story well, because I think it's much more dramatic and a lot more fun when you don't know if he's lying, but man, you find out later because something happens in the story. And then you think back and you're like, oh, it was that guard. He lied to me, you know. That's more dramatic. That's more fun. But when you roll a skill check, sometimes, I don't know, maybe that detracts from the role play. So anyway, we'll see. Let's see. Well, we've got some more comments here. Dark Age, my biggest complaint with 5e, talents, feats, features, etc. Too much. Yeah, I mentioned that in another video, that I was playing a 3rd level ranger, and I had like 9 skills and abilities, and not skills, but abilities and, you know, backgrounds and whatever that I had to keep track of. And I was just like, what happened to me was I was looking down at my sheet constantly, so I didn't miss anything. Further says, I look forward to seeing and hearing your experience with the OSR. Great work, Sam. Great vids and good conversations. I'm off to work. Yeah, I know I'm at work, but I'm on a little bit of a break. We'll see the rest of this later. Roleplay is first. Yep. And then uploading my OSR enticement video now. Check it out. Cool. Yeah, I look forward to that for sure. And I mean, certainly anybody who's familiar with OSR gaming, who's played it, who continues to play it, let me know, like, what is the expectation? Because the ones that I'm looking at are the earlier versions, right? They're retro clones, but they're not of, they're ones typically before the skill systems, right? OD&D, Swords and Wizardry White Box, or Basic Fantasy, right? They don't really have skills. And so, I don't know, to me, I just wonder if perhaps skills can be a detriment to roleplay, or like Dark Age said, are unnecessary, right? And again, I will fully admit that that's not always the case. I mean, it depends on the group, it depends on the GM, right? Again, if you value the narration and the story and the role play, most GMs are going to say, they will they will go with your description, they will have you roll, and then they will kind of tailor their response to both of those things, right? But the other thing I've seen happen, and I'll kind of end it with this, the other thing I've seen happen is that a player will describe what they want to do. They will give an attempt to create this really cool scene and whatever, and they have a really good, skill in something, and then they roll the dice and they fail, right? And maybe part of the problem was with their narration and the fact that they were taking too much liberty there and they were assuming success. But I've always had a hard time with the fact that somebody is highly competent at something. They describe a perfectly reasonable way of accomplishing the task, and then it is messed up by a bad die roll. Now I get it, right? I mean, that's part of the game. And two, that is taking into account the chance, the randomness of the world. So I understand the theory behind it, but to me, I don't know, it makes a lot more sense to be like, okay, you've described a really good description. This is very reasonable. This makes a lot of sense. Is there a chance of failure? Yeah, maybe, but you are highly, highly skilled at it. So most likely, I mean, if it were me, I'm going to give them that. Okay? So this is what's appealing to me about some of the earliest versions of D&D, some of the OSR games that I've seen, is that because they don't have skills, I feel more comfortable as the GM just doing that, just going off of narration. Where I feel personally with newer editions and with other games, right? Like Star Wars, Edge of the Empire, with Fate, whatever. Like Fate doesn't have skills, but I mean, with some of these systems, I feel like I have to stick with the system, the skill system that they have in place, because that's the expectation, and that's what the players have built their characters with that in mind, right? But with OD&D, I feel like what I can do, I have a lot more freedom as the GM to base my decisions and my rulings based on the descriptions of the players, not just on a dice roll, because of a skill. So anyway, I thought I would bring that up. I'd love to hear your feedback. Anybody who has whatever take on this, please feel free to let me know. Drop some comments below. Go ahead and do a video response if you feel strongly about it. I really love those. Oh, hey, we got a comment here from Dice on Ice. Hey, guys. Not sure which of you this is, but thanks for commenting. It says, what I'd like to do as a GM is to make a player's skill proficiency without there being a D20 roll. Make it matter. Yeah, I mean, and so it's tricky because in modern D&D, right, like in 5e, they've taken steps to kind of minimize skill points in the skill system a little bit, right? Because by using proficiency. And I think that they've done a good job there. I mean, they've taken 5e and made it a lot more old school than 4th edition or 3.5. But still, what you're looking at is you're looking at your attribute modifier, proficiency if you have it, and then maybe environmental effects or something along those lines. And those all go into your skill roll, right? And then, excuse me, with 5th edition, what you can do, obviously, is the description can help with whether they get advantage or disadvantage, right? So there are all these sort of mechanics and gimmicks in there that can help you as the GM to adjudicate a skill check. But sometimes I just wonder if it's not even necessary, right? Like if you just say, okay, you player, describe to me what you want to do. Assume you don't have a skill, or if you do, you are very skilled at this thing because of the type of character you are, but you don't have anything written on a paper that is going to, in the game, matter. Describe what you would do. Tell me what you would do. And then based on that, if you still need a dice roll, then you say, okay, great. Well, so this is what we're going to do. I'm going to have you roll a d20 based on your description. and the fact that you are accomplished at this, taking into consideration these environmental factors, we're going to modify the dice in this way, right? So essentially what you're doing is you're still doing what you would be doing with a skill check, but you're basing it on the role play and not numbers on a page. So anyway, thought I would bring that up. Love to hear your thoughts. Happy gaming all.